Congress is making some noise about war powers. We'll get into that. Plus, is Nancy Pelosi's scheme working when it comes to withholding the articles of impeachment? And we do have confirmation now from numerous sources that the Iranians shot that plane out of the sky, killing hundreds of civilians. We'll get into that and much more coming up on the Buck Sexton Show. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. We had some news break before we came on air. I just wanted to update you that we now have numerous sources based on Iraqi military and U.S. Pentagon reports that the plane that was taking off from Tehran International Airport en route to Kiev in Ukraine was, in fact, shot out of the sky. Appears to be an accident by the Iranians using what is known in NATO parlance as a Gauntlet anti-aircraft missile system. So not exactly clear how such a horrific and catastrophic blunder could have been made this way, but it is exactly what many of us were expecting. That's why I was talking to you yesterday on the show about the shoot-down of MH17 over Ukraine. Remember, with Russian-backed, or with Ukrainian separatists with Russian military equipment. It seems that we have another man-caused airline tragedy here, and we'll have updates for you on that as we can. But that was my expectation. I didn't want to get too ahead of where the facts are, and sure enough, that is exactly what happened. So we have two moving pieces right now on Capitol Hill. You're in a moment here of a narrative reset, right? There's not yet an impeachment trial, and there's not yet any major military hostilities with Iran underway. And so what you have right now is a circumstance in which the Republicans, some of the Republicans in the Senate, are deciding to make a lot of noise about war powers, and then also Nancy Pelosi is dancing and moving around and doing whatever she has to do, giving press conferences. She had one this morning, just babbling on. Nancy Pelosi gets much more credit for being a tactical and strategic genius than she deserves. She deserves no credit for those things. She is cunning. She is not an intellectual. She is not strategic, and she is not ethical. But she is cunning. But so was Pablo Escobar. I mean, there are a lot of people that understand the basic will to power and are willing to do whatever they need to get it. That's not something necessarily should admire. In fact, in many cases, it's a cause for tremendous concern. Pelosi is not some grand strategist. She just rules with an iron fist. So did Stalin. Now, I'm not comparing Pelosi to Stalin, but I'm just saying because she's able to get people to do what she says in a Democratic Party that increasingly emotionally and intellectually likes of AOC, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, right? These are the people who are the current id of the Democratic Party. They are the center, the core, the most important power and messaging area of the Democratic Party today. So we want to get into that. But I want to first start actually with the Republicans, if I can, because, you haven't heard a lot from recently is Mike Lee. And I'm going to say this. I remember I interviewed Mike back in the day, and maybe we can have him back. I found him. Look, if you're somebody that really likes to hear someone try to turn everything into a lesson about the Constitution, you might find Mike Lee really, really interesting. If you think that sometimes that can be a little bit, that he can be a bit verbose and not everything is necessary of a constitutional discourse, well, then maybe you don't find Mike Lee. Oh, look, he's a good guy, and I'm not saying anything other than that. He's a good man. But I would say that Mike Lee is very fond of giving lectures on the Constitution. And here's what I would say about yesterday. Oh, and by the way, Rand Paul, too. Look, I like Rand Paul on some things. I think that Rand Paul can be a very important voice, and I think he is a principled guy. I suppose I have a little bit more, I give a little bit more leeway to Rand than I do to Mike Lee on some of these issues. And that's just a personal preference thing. So I'm trying to be honest with you about it. But here's Rand. I thought we had Mike Lee, but we have Rand Paul coming out of this. Do we have we do? Oh, I'm sorry. Play Mike Lee coming out of this is now the White House national security officials, Pentagon officials briefing the members of the Senate. And I forget who, I think it was a CIA director. So that's executive branch. I think there was some U.S. Mill in there too. But senior level executive branch folks briefing senators on the decision to strike Qasem Soleimani. Mike Lee was unhappy about it. Play it.
We were brought into this briefing today to talk to us about that attack on Friday. I had hoped and expected to receive more information outlining the legal, factual, and moral justification for the attack. I was left somewhat unsatisfied on that front. The briefing lasted only 75 minutes, whereupon our briefers left. This, however, is not the biggest problem I have with the briefing, which I would add was probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate. What I found so distressing about that briefing was that one of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran.
I mean, that does seem a bit strange. Mike Lee seems very, very upset here. But I have a slightly different, not slightly, take on all of this, which is that the Congress appears to want to take back its war powers after 19 years of abdication by now, and this is what may happen in the House, voting on a non-binding resolution to voice their opinion on a war with Iran that is not happening. President Trump does not want to go to war with Iran. We now have ample evidence of that. The people who said that taking out Qasem Soleimani was going to lead to a massive conflagration, U.S. toppling of the regime in Tehran, all of these things, that just did not happen. Didn't happen. And people can ignore that now. They can pretend that at some point in the future it might, and that's always true. You can always just extend out the timeline so you look like you are less wrong or not wrong. But I would like to know exactly what the objection is specifically that Mike Lee has. I mean, okay, if someone in the executive branch said, let's not undermine the president publicly by saying he shouldn't be able to do anything here, well, that's their opinion. Mike Lee's allowed to ignore their opinion. So he can not like the briefing, that's fine, but I've never seen Mike Lee so huffy about anything. And I would just note that it's interesting to me to see members of Congress after we've had, never mind all the other additional military operations and paramilitary operations in the case of, say, CIA and intelligence activities all over the world. We've had that going on for how many years now? 2 decades. Congress was willing to give the president the authority to go to war. They voted on that for the Iraq War, right? And yet here we are now looking at what's going on today, and they're very upset at the prospect of war with Iran. And I would just say, okay, there's not going to be a war with Iran, at least not under this president at this time. It's just not happening. But they seem particularly upset about this. Chuck Schumer. Wait, hold on. We'll get to Schumer in a second, because everybody very upset about this. Members of Congress are complaining about it all over the place. And then you had where I was trying to find Rand Paul. Where did my man Rand go? I do like Rand, even though he's not the warmest and cuddliest fellow. I can tell you that from my numerous interactions with him. Yeah, play clip 12.
They have justified the killing of an Iranian general as being something that Congress gave them permission to do in 2002. That is absurd. That's an insult. And every time someone writes that Congress needs to take back their authority on war, that's what we're here to do. Let's have the debate, and let's have some senators stand up, and let's see if we can really, truly have a debate over who has the power to declare war.
Well, here's the problem, and you can go back to the Federalist Papers to see this debate played out a couple of centuries ago and what the founders really thought about this. I mean, the reason we have an executive branch that has the authority and the powers that it does is, for example, to be able to repel an invasion or in cases of extremis, meaning there's an imminent threat, the executive branch can take action. It does not require a vote from Congress, right? If there were Iranian planes in the sky about to drop bombs all over a U.S. facility in the Middle East, the president doesn't go to Congress and say, hold on a second, guys, can we shoot those planes out of the sky? Now, this is a long and it's a worthwhile debate and discussion. The public should know about this. But I think that it's right now, let's be honest about it. It's a lot of posturing for members of Congress. It is a lot of posturing. Nothing is really going to change. So while they can be upset about this and the non-interventionist, one of the problems you have with the non-interventionist voice as it is within the GOP now, and I consider myself largely non-interventionist now as well. I mean, I usually agree with what Rand Paul is saying about U.S. actions in the Middle East. I mean, I usually agree with those who have taken the position. I've taken the position. I debated last year at CPAC with, who's that fellow, sort of large fellow, broad fellow from the Washington Post, Mark Thiessen. Very nice guy. I debated with him last year at CPAC on this very issue about U.S. troops in Syria. I don't think that we should be taking on the mission set of stabilization in that country, which, by the way, if you're going to have a permanent military presence there or it's going to be there for years and years, you're going to set up a base, you're going to have logistics, you're going to have resupply, guess what? Now you are part of stability operations in that country. You can pretend you're not, but you are. I didn't think that was a good idea. But there's this old saying in the State Department, and it's one of my favorites because I've sat in many meetings with State Department officials, or did sit in many meetings with State Department officials back in the day. And they always say that there are three options, right? Suffer in silence, nuclear war, or do some diplomacy. The idea here being, of course, well, then we really need our diplomats because the options are suffer in silence or nuclear war, and those aren't good. So I guess we got to do more diplomacy. Okay, the problem with that is that there's a lot in between suffering and nuclear war, and that's what we have been reminded of with the Iranians. At what point have they're testing our defenses. They are trying to see what lines they can cross. And this president decided that the old line of as long as you don't do something horrifically egregious openly as the Iranian government, killing Americans, taking credit for it. And even at that point, you could say in Iraq, I mean, they were doing it through proxies, but it was very obvious what was going on there. Look, I mean, I think that was, as I'm describing to you what the red line used to be, I think the fundamental flaw in all this was that the old red line wasn't even that you couldn't kill Americans. The Bush administration, because it got so beat down in Iraq, was saying, okay, well, we can't take on Iran too. So the red line all of a sudden fell back to you can't kill large numbers of Americans all at once in somewhere other than Iraq. Trump came along and said, okay, no, we're going to redo this. And now you're not going to be able to threaten to kill a lot of Americans in Iraq, or we're coming after you. If you kill our people, we will kill you. It's a very straightforward rule. That is the Trump doctrine. And to have members of Congress act like there's some huge, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this? Guys, what is your real ask of the president? That he come to you for permission before he does the customs? Think about how that would go. And also, let's be serious. What do we think are the operational security concerns about this? Do you really trust every Democrat not to leak that to the media, to then leak it publicly so that even someone like Qasem Soleimani might get word of it? People get mad at me for saying this. I don't trust the Democrats. I don't trust the Democrats with this stuff. Trump obviously doesn't trust them very much because he doesn't give them the courtesy prior notification before a major strike like this. So Mike Lee says it's the worst briefing he's seen. He doesn't like it. Rand Paul says it's a bad briefing. He doesn't like it. You know who else doesn't like it? Chuck Schumer. Play clip 11.
There were so many important questions that they did not answer. We did not see a satisfying plan for the future. We had 97 senators there. 15 got to ask questions. As the questions began to get tough, they walked out. I've asked for a commitment that they all come back within a week. We have not yet gotten that commitment.
Bunch of senators trying to find out what the future holds. The people in that room, CIA director and others, they don't They don't know what the future holds. And they can't make the kind of promises that these senators want, which they say is all about restoring Congress's right to declare war. But ultimately, they also are asking for constraints on the executive branch. Ultimately, there are additional considerations and concerns that come into play here that members of the Senate, members of the Congress are not taking particularly seriously as they look at this, or not, at least not understanding fully as they look at this. Oh, we got one more here. Tulsi. You guys, some of you get mad at me. You say I'm a little too sweet on Tulsi just because she's got that aloha spirit and she surfs and stuff and doesn't seem, she serves her country in the military. It's not some hateful, psychopathic Democrat like so many of the other ones. But that doesn't mean that she's right on stuff. She's wrong on pretty much everything. But she did not like the Iran briefing either. Play 10.
I just came from the intelligence briefing that the administration came and brought to Congress. Really, they provided vague comments, no justification whatsoever for this illegal and unconstitutional act of war that President Trump took.
No justification. The president of the United States said there was an imminent threat against an enemy combatant, a designated terrorist by the Obama administration, by the way. That so quickly gets left out of this conversation. Where were all these Democrats when Obama was giving an entirely based on secret information that was not made public, that did not have to be justified? Obama was droning a U.S. citizen and his minor son. I'm not crying any tears for the guy in Yemen, but let's be serious. The Obama administration was waging a drone war in Pakistan, a country that we are not at war with, killing how many people? Hundreds and hundreds of strikes, lots of civilians killed. Were the Democrats all? No, of course. This is all politics, my friends. It's just hot air coming from most of these people. Some of them, I think, have some principle. I do think Lee and Rand Paul have principles, but we know Democrats don't have principles. It's really amazing, isn't it? You have all these people who were claiming that we were about to get hit with this huge Iranian strike. Now we see that the Iranians blew a civilian airliner out of the sky with their on Iraqi soil, what turned into what was essentially a very expensive fireworks show, as my friend and colleague Jim Carafano said from the Heritage Foundation about that strike. So, I mean, the Iranians blew a plane out of their own airspace, a civilian airliner, in trying to retaliate against us. The retaliation against us was nothing, and yet we still have all these people telling us that we need to avoid that war is imminent. I mean, look, I don't want war with Iran either. The president doesn't want war with Iran. I'm waiting for someone to stand up who has any power or authority or sway whatsoever, who says, you know what I think would be a great idea? Let's go to war with Iran. I just don't see it. I haven't heard. Okay, maybe Bolton. Maybe Bolton. Maybe. If I'm going to be fair about it. I think Bolton has learned no lessons in 20 years.
There is absolutely no justification. We've been lied into war before. Unfortunately, I had a front row seat to that, and I know how that was approached. And I see this all over again, where the intelligence is so thin. And I want to point something out that I don't think anyone's really noticed, which is, on one hand, you have Trump denigrating the intelligence community if they do something that he does not deem in his favor. On the other hand, now we're supposed to take everything they say as trust us. The intelligence community told us that we have imminent information about an imminent threat. You can't have it both ways.
Valerie Plame, noted fraud and anti-Semite, by the way, running for Congress as a Democrat, of course. Someone who was willing to just go along for the ride as angry Democrats tried to, they really were going after Karl Rove and thought maybe they would get Dick Cheney with, oh, that's right, a special counsel under Bush. People forget about that. It's almost like the Democrats play the same game every time. Weaponize the process, use investigations when you can't convince the people to agree with you and you can't get power through democratic means that way. Find some power-mad deep state bureaucrats, Patrick Fitzgerald being the one in mind here, who has a long history, by the way, of going after very convenient targets from the Democratic point of view, Democratic political targets, meaning that targets the Democrats want him to go after, and then having to be slapped down even by the Supreme Court, as you see with the prosecution of Conrad Black, and as you see with President Bush's commutation of the Scooter Libby prosecution and conviction. Republicans, some of them just aren't really willing to fight back. Just a commutation at the very last minute. It was a stunning circumstance that President Bush was unwilling to do what was necessary there. I'm telling you, Bush was beaten down. Bush term 2, and I saw him, I talked to him, I know. You could tell. You look in the guy's eyes. He was beaten down. You had Democrats calling him a war criminal. I mean, the whole thing was completely... And so this is what Democrats do all the time. Everything is, oh my gosh, the world is going to end. We're not getting our way. They're just a giant... It really is the party of crybabies. Just a bunch of crybabies. A bunch of unrealistic, unaccountable, whiny crybabies. I mean, that's if you're looking for the modern ethos of the Democratic Party, and that's really what it is. But back to, so Valerie Plame saying we're going to get lied into war here. You remember she was so upset about being outed that she posed in the cover of Vanity Fair right away. That's how upset it was really traumatizing to her. And they made this horrifically bad movie about her, as if Novak publishing her name. This was retaliation. Who cares? The little bureaucrats running around everywhere in the intelligence community. The whole thing was absurd. It was absurd. But the Democrat story around it is, that's right. Bush was a traitor too. Remember that? This was their Bush is a traitor narrative. Somehow Republicans never really win elections. 2000, Al Gore, Florida, 2016, Russia, Trump. Republican presidents are always traitors. Bush, Cheney, Valerie Plame's name in the press. Now of course Russia collusion with Trump. Republican presidents are always senile or crazy, or essentially complete and utter morons. This is what they say about all presidents, stretching back to Reagan. It's never just maybe let's see how they do. I can't think of a serious human being that I would respect their opinion at this point, who would say that the first 4 years of Obama's presidency have been better than the first 4 years, or rather going into the fourth year, I should say, but the first 3 years versus the first 3 years. Trump is better. Trump is better at the job. His foreign policy is better. His economy is better. His domestic policy is better. All across the board. I mean, if you're really into wokeness, and if you really want to see a huge anti-police movement across the country, and you want to see parts of U.S. cities burning down during race riots, I mean, then you could have liked what was going on during the previous administration a whole lot more. But no, we have something else today. We have a different approach, and we're being told all this crazy stuff by Democrats who refuse to accept the reality where this is. So since we're talking about crazy Democrats, which is obviously a favorite topic of mine, we have Representative Pramila Jayapal. Now, one of the big, I'm going to play what she said about the Qasem Soleimani killing in a second. One of the big complaints that you've heard from Democrats is that Republicans are unfairly saying that Democrats are sad or mourning that Qasem Soleimani was killed, or that, they're taking the opposite side from the United States. I don't understand how people could see what the Democrats have been doing here. At every step of this whole process with Qasem Soleimani, Iran, the standoff, they have taken the position in their analysis, and they've taken the position in terms of where they've put their support that is oppositional to the United States. I don't know how else you can see it. They're not on our team because all that matters is the defeat of Donald Trump. Everything else is a completely irrelevant consideration for them. Here is Pramila Jayapal talking about the strike on Soleimani. Play 4.
This is the result of reckless actions by President Trump of military brinksmanship. President Trump recklessly assassinated Qasem Soleimani. He had no evidence of an imminent threat or attack, and we say that coming from a classified briefing where, again, there was no raw evidence presented that there was an imminent threat.
recklessly assassinated Qasem Soleimani. Why was it reckless? In fact, I think if anything, it has changed the dynamic between the U.S. and Iran and the Middle East in a way that favors U.S. national security interests. Look at the way that the Israelis deal with their enemies. Do the Israelis sit around and have all these hand-wringing discussions about, there are Hezbollah terrorists running around Syria preparing to do something bad against us. Maybe we should go ask the UN before we... No, the Israelis are like, sorry, we're just going to defend ourselves. And now people will say, but the Iranians think they're defending themselves. Right, well, this is where you get into the separation between a very important, a foundational separation between the way Democrats and Republicans see America and the way it acts in the world. We see the world in terms of there are good regimes and bad regimes. There are good guys and bad guys. It's not the same thing when the good guys take action as when the bad guys take action. The Nazis in World War II had whole, justifications for the invasion of Poland. And you look at Danzig, you look at the way that it was, we're defending our people, and they staged things. And, they had stories about how they were just defending themselves, or they were, they're the Nazis. They're the bad guys. And we're the good guys. Democrats like to play this game of, oh no, everyone's just pursuing their interests and it's all the same. That's just not true. In fact, one of the most troubling things we've seen is Democrats like Jayapal here. And by the way, they're not presenting raw classified information to some of these members of Congress to justify the attack. Maybe it's because they don't trust them, which is possible. I know that that's unsettling for some to hear, but that's certainly possible. It's also the case that Qasem Soleimani was standing outside the United States Embassy that had just been assaulted and was orchestrating the whole thing. And maybe we didn't want to wait for round two. And maybe we felt like enough is enough. This guy's killed a lot of Americans. He's killed a lot of Muslims all across the Middle East, too. He supports actual designated terrorist groups. They keep saying this, but, why is that different? I'm seeing a lot of leftists. So he's pursuing he's an Iranian general pursuing Iranian military ends. Okay, well, ISIS had uniforms. ISIS had all the trappings of a government. We just didn't say they were a government. So does ISIS get, should we treat the leadership of, now gone, thank you, Trump, but should we have treated them like we treat the Canadians? It's a government, it's all the same, right? It's all the same. These are recurring themes, right? The intellectual rot of the Democratic Party is moral relativism. They refuse to make moral distinctions because when you make moral distinctions, then you're also accountable for your decision-making and your actions in ways that people on the left just don't want to be. It's always, you just kind of can always muddy the waters, always make things a little fuzzy in ways that benefit you or your team or your politics or your sense of what you want in the world. That's the great thing about leftists. Being a leftist means you're never accountable for anything. It's always, real socialism wasn't tried. Iran is just pursuing its interests like everybody else pursues their interests. They're no different that government's no different than anybody else. Republicans are like, no, it's actually part of the axis of evil and is the greatest state sponsor of terror in the world, and we're going to kill a terror chief before he can continue to threaten us in ways that are deeply problematic. I would just also point out that there was a willingness on display from Democrats yesterday. It was amazing that when there were Democrats, you could tell from what they were saying from, Trump is now getting wagged after he wagged the dog, Lawrence O'Donnell. They were hoping for things to go really badly for America. There were Democrats who you can tell were just waiting to say, ha, I told you so, after there were a whole lot of U.S. casualties from an Iranian counterstrike. That's what they were waiting for. They were hoping for that moment, which is really unsettling. It should be very troubling to all of us. If I had known about the bin Laden raid, for example, before it happened, which obviously I didn't, but I'm saying if I had, I wouldn't have been sitting there like, well, I hope this doesn't work. And, maybe we lose a few Blackhawks with our incredibly brave Navy SEALs, but at least that means Obama won't get reelected. That would have been a horrific, treasonous kind of thing to think. No, I want success for the United States, first and foremost, whatever that means. I want America and its people to do well. I want our soldiers to be safe. I want our missions to be successful. Democrats were sitting there, a lot of them, you can just tell from their responses, ooh, now we get to really stick it to Trump after the Iranians have shed a lot of American blood. This is where they are. And when that didn't happen, the response you had from many of them was, oh, well, it's because The Iranians are so rational and reasonable. The Iranians are more reasonable and rational than Trump was. And Trump is. So thank you, Iran, for not doing, the maximum that you could in terms of damage, showing our president real statesmanship. That was a sentiment. You can see it. It was all over social media. There are people that really believe this. They really think that, we should. The Iranians are people are, and the way they talk about it, of course, they're not as blatant about it. I'm telling you what their thought processes really are. But they'll say, oh, well, the Iranians they're rational actors. And see, they were willing to, we're lucky that they didn't try to do more. No, we're not lucky they didn't do more. The only reason the Iranians don't try to kill 1,000 Americans tomorrow in a massive strike is because they know the next day we would kill every member of the IRGC we could find anywhere on a map and then say, who's next? That's the only reason. It's not because of, CNN anchors who really think that what they have to say at night's really important about the international community's opinions. It's not because of the UN. It's not because of bureaucrats in Brussels. It's none of that. It's because the United States military stands behind our government, stands behind this president of the United States as commander-in-chief and says, you want to play rough? We can play rough too. As opposed to the Obama administration sending them cash, which we'll get into later on, I can assure you.
I think they're overreacting, quite frankly. Go debate all you want to. I'm going to debate you. Trust me, I'm going to let people know that at this moment in time, to play this game with a War Powers Act, which I think is unconstitutional, is that whether you mean to or not, you're empowering the enemy. I know you don't mean to, but we live in the real world here. So debate all you want. This is a constitutional democracy, but get ready for a lively debate.
And I think he's right. It felt like histrionics from especially from Mike Lee coming out of there. Okay, well, tell us really what the problem is. Is the president not supposed to be able to take action? I mean, why does Congress do this thing where they're giving, it's like they're consenting to the broad authority the president has to do whatever he or she theoretically thinks needs to be done in this region or for our national security, and then they complain when the president uses that authority. Well, then what have you done in the first place? To say that the authorization for the use of military force does not cover things like this would be to say that our military forces deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan cannot be defended at the discretion of the commander-in-chief because it might upset some particularly non-interventionist members of Congress. That's just not going to work. Lindsey Graham, who I agree with sometimes, I don't agree with others, is willing to say, look, I'm not even sure that the Congress has the authority, really. I mean, this is a core separation of powers issue. If the president says we're under attack, and the Congress says, no, you have to ask us for, Congress has the power of the purse. Congress could defund the military, right? I mean, there are things that could be done. But do they get to tell the president what to do? This also reminds me of how, and we're going to talk about the border wall construction situation later and how that's stuck in the courts. You hear people say things, they'll say that Trump is an anti-Semite, for example. And then you look at how, I'm pretty sure there's like a town that's named after Trump in Israel, and there's also the moving of the embassy that president after president said they do. Then they all got cold feet on it. And Trump did that, which was clearly what the Israeli government wanted him to do. Trump does not speak ill of the Israelis' defense of themselves and their interests. And Trump understands the Israelis are the good guys, Hamas are the bad guys. It's pretty straightforward. Doesn't mean that all Palestinians are bad people, but Hamas are the bad guys. Obama was more, Hamas is a reflection of oppressed people, that Israel, the settlements. He had that faculty lounge leftist. Okay, I'm pro-Israel as long as I can get enough donations to be president of America, but I'm not really pro-Israel when it comes to what's going on in that region of the world, or not as much as my predecessors had been, and certainly the follow-on presidency of Trump is. But, you look at the separation. I mean, you look at the way that Trump has been willing to go to the courts, hear from Congress on these issues. If he's an anti-Semite, he's terrible at it, as seen by moving the embassy. And if he's an authoritarian, which is another thing you keep hearing, And, oh, you know, we need to constrain Trump. This is a narrative out of nothing. Did you see that? Did they pay attention to the speech Trump gave yesterday? It was a very measured, reasonable, entirely responsible speech. Here's really the problem a lot of them have with this. Trump showed what actual courage when it comes to the commander-in-chief is. Making a decision that your predecessors were not willing to make because you know that it's the right thing to do. And it is a risk, but it's a risk that you want to take under the circumstances. That is what an executive does. These other people in Congress, the Pelosis, the Schumers, the Mike Lees, they're politicians. They want to convince you they're always doing the right thing. They're always doing what you want. And you know what ends up happening? They do nothing. Just a lot of blather, a lot of bap, 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 bap. That's what you get from them. So, yeah, it might sound fancy, but it doesn't get us very far.